Okay, well, welcome everybody to this panel on activism and good thinking. We've had some stunning examples on the stage this weekend. People like Dr. Raichi, Carrie Poppy, all demonstrating good quality skeptical activism. So the aim of this panel is really to highlight, encourage and inspire activism. And perhaps expand skepticism outside of the pub and from criticism and discussion toward engagement and action. So I'm going to introduce the panel very briefly. We have the wonderful Simon Singh, the equally wonderful Richard Saunders, and Marsh. What's up? Oh, hello, Keir. How you doing, dude? All right. I'll be calling Keir up in a moment. So, Simon, would you start us off by introducing the session and talk a little bit about the awards that have already been made, please?
Actually, I'll just stand up, while I say a few words. So I started an organisation about a year ago now, maybe less than that, called Good Thinking. And the idea of good thinking is we're still not quite sure what the idea of good thinking is. We're kind of finding our feet and we're kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. We ran the blog prizes last year. And one of the things we've been doing is offering small grants to help skeptical activism. So we're supporting a skeptical podcast in Israel. We're supporting a campaign to look at private screening clinics and some of the claims they make, run by Margaret McCartney, a very good blogger in Glasgow. And a couple of the people that have received grants are just here today, so I thought they'd like to maybe just come up for a minute and just explain what they're using their grant for. And first maybe is Simon Clare from Horsham Skeptics.
Hello. Down in the southeast, there's several skeptics in the pubs down there, and we've got together to form the Southeast Skeptic Society. One of the things we're trying to do is actually encourage new skeptics in the pub groups to start in our region. In our region, there is, in skepticism, a Kent-shaped hole where there is nothing.
Could you say that word again, please?
It's a hole the shape of Kent. There is one in Tunbridge Wells, but Kent is a long place, and I figured with a £500 grant, I could afford to do essentially a Skeptics in the Pub roadshow across Kent to a few of the towns over there that are at least the size of Horsham, because in Horsham there's 60,000 people live there, and we've got a sustainable Skeptics in the Pub. There are plenty of towns that size or bigger in Kent that could do the Skeptics in the Pub. So I'm going to do one-off shows in Ashford, Maidstone and Canterbury, and the intention is to do one-off shows that are great in their own right, but to encourage people to take those on from us. We'll be planting the seeds, and we hope to just leave you with a few more skeptics in the pubs running in Kent. And that's
cool. That's Keir's at that thing as well, so much.
I mean, it's tough to run a Skeptics in the Pub group, and it takes time and effort. We heard yesterday from lots of great people, so to have somebody who's actually willing to try and go out and break new ground, we're very keen to support that. Similarly, with Edinburgh Skeptics, who've not only run a very effective group in Edinburgh, but also extended that to the Fringe, we're really keen to support Edinburgh Skeptics, and we're actually giving you two grants. Keir Liddell from Edinburgh Skeptics just got a few words to say.
Well, as Simon said, a grant from the Good Thinking Society will be helping us to support running the Fringe in 2014 and carrying on that good work. But we also applied for a grant to look into making Skeptics in the Pub in Edinburgh more accessible and more inclusive. So we approached the Good Thinking Society asking if we could have a grant to run an experiment to have a signing interpreter come to one of our Skeptics in the Pub, so we could run an event that's accessible to those who are deaf or hard of hearing, and see if we can expand the reach beyond what it is now and include more people, basically.
That's great. Okay, so let's get cracking with the discussion. The first thing I'd like to do is ask the panel to comment in turn, perhaps starting with you, Simon. Could you give us a comment about good skeptical activism? What is it, and can you give us some examples?
Okay, I mean, I think the first thing is that it's each to their own. It depends on what skill set you have. It depends on what your interests are, whether it's psychic or alternative medicine. It depends about your personal characteristics and your approach, whether you're you're more a case of somebody who can use regulations to tackle. In fact, I can see Alan Hennis here. A great example of skeptical activism was when Alan and Maria McLachlan and Simon Perry of Leicester Skeptics said there are a group of chiropractors out there who are making outrageous claims, and they're suing Simon for that, which seems a bit unfair. But making those claims in the first place is absurd. There must be regulations. Indeed, chiropractors are regulated by the General Chiropractic Council. How can we use those regulations to keep them legal, decent and honest? And over what seems to be maybe a very long weekend, they trawled the internet, they looked at chiropractors' websites, they identified all of the members of the British Chiropractic Association who were making non-evidence-based claims, and they submitted 600 complaints.
I did 524.
You did 524. And the result of that was panic in the chiropractic community. And within a matter of days, websites were being withdrawn wholesale. And to me, that's the... Sorry, Hal.
It was 12 minutes. There was an email went out at 12 minutes past 9 on the morning after we got my complaint.
Yeah, and this was a society telling all of its members, for God's sake, take down your websites before they get complained about. So in a weekend, that small group of skeptics did more to correct the false claims of chiropractors than all of the regulators had done in the previous 20 years. And so that's how simple. There was a lot of effort and a lot of nous and a lot of smarts went into it, but the impact was huge. Personally, the first time I got involved in skeptical activism, so my background, so it's probably similar to many of yours, is that I used to love science. I still love science. But I kind of used to I spent my time going out and celebrating. So I wrote books about Fermat's last theorem and the wonder of maths and Big Bang, the wonder of the universe, and I did a PhD in particle physics. I love this stuff, and I just thought the best thing in the world was just to celebrate all of that. And then I became aware of these outrageous claims that were being made, particularly in the alternative medical community, I suppose. And I realised that nobody was tackling these claims, or there were people tackling them, but scientists weren't really doing it. Scientists are kind of on their bench, focusing on their work, not tackling the pseudoscience, and that's kind of what skeptics do. So the first thing I did was, when I heard that students were using homeopathy to treat themselves, to protect themselves against malaria, and so I couldn't believe this was true. So I worked with Sense About Science. We had a young graduate student who went to 10 homeopaths. Some of you may know the story very well. She went to 10 homeopaths. She said to them, I'm going to West Africa where there are strains of malaria that will kill within 3 days. She said, I'm going to be there for 10 weeks on a truck tour. I don't want to use conventional treatments. Can you give me something to use instead? And out of the 10 homeopaths, every single one of them was willing to send her off with sugar pills and expose herself to this deadly risk. And so we went undercover, she went undercover, she had recordings, sometimes she had email exchanges, sometimes she had phone recordings. We documented that, we put out a report, Newsnight covered it, the Telegraph and some other newspapers covered it, and for the first time people were talking about this outrage that on the one hand it was bizarre that people were trying homeopathy, but more bizarre that homeopaths were willing to offer those treatments, and that there was this little industry that was going on that nobody was really dealing with. And I felt very proud of that, because when you Googled before that, you Googled homeopathy malaria, you found websites that were willing to offer homeopathy for malaria protection. Afterwards, when you Googled it, you found the newspaper coverage in Newsnight. So that was the first time I realised that with a bit of nous and a bit of smarts and a bit of effort, you can begin to make a change. So that's the kind of thing that fits my personality trait, or fits Alan's trait and his skill set. And those are the ideas that maybe we can explore today, and others.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Richard, would you like to make a comment? The question is, can you give us a comment about good skeptical activism? What is it? And can you give an example or two, please?
Yeah. I think Simon made a lot of very good points there, of course. I can give you an example of skeptical activism that really paid off. but I'm going to preface this with some background. Before I helped to bust the power balance fiasco a couple of years ago, that was after 10 plus years of being a skeptic, reading the skeptical books, looking at videos, going to conventions and listening to other people. It's not something I just woke up one morning and thought I would bust. And it's very important to remember that. A lot of new skeptics are very keen, and they would really love to get out there and bust the quacks or bring down the shonks or whatever it is. Good, I hope so. But you must remember, unless you know what you're doing, you can make an ass out of yourself and damage the community. You just must know your stuff. And also, last year at this very table, I was chairing a panel about legality. What are the legal aspects of being a skeptic? And that's something any active skeptic must bear in mind. You can't just go out marching down the street calling a quack a quack. There are ways to do it legally and safely. And as I said last year, you do not want to end up in court. That's the last place you want to end up. I don't have to tell Simon Singh that. So, with a background, cutting my teeth, reading the books, doing the hard yards, so to speak, when the situation arose with the power balance, and I saw the report on the TV, and I recognized the tricks being used. You're probably all familiar with the tricks, pressing down on the arm and tipping people over and all that sort of stuff. Not only did I know the tricks well enough to be able to comment on them, I knew how to perform a test. That's something else I cut my teeth on and I learned. So when I was called up to go to the studio and the promoter was there, I was able to construct a test, a double-blind test, as it happened, like the one I just did in the other room, which the guy failed. So it's that background, knowing those things helped enormously. I could have simply learned a few tricks, the power balance tricks, turned up and not known how to construct a proper test, and insisted that it's blind, and insisted we use a dice and things like that. So that's one of the better ones for me, using my skill set. But when we think about someone like Dr. Raichi and the anti-vaccination movement, with her, that's her skill set, that's her strength, and she knows all about it. I'm the cheer squad. I can help. I can be there and support. I can help uncover things, and I know some of the psychology. It's sort of the reverse when it comes to psychics. When it comes to the psychics and other claims, that's my strength, and I can be active, and someone like Dr. Raichi can be the cheer squad and add support. So I guess what I'm saying is, not only do you should know your stuff, which is very, very, very important, is you have a good base of people, and you can call upon their strengths and use their strengths in the right way. I think that goes a long way into being a good active skeptic.
Marsh, same question. A comment about good skeptical activism. What is it? And can you give us an example? Let's see how long it takes him to mention 1023.
Actually, I was going nowhere near that, Andy. But
that's a shame, because it's the only one I've ever been involved in.
I was going to slightly disagree with Richard, but with a caveat, and that's quite a controversial thing to do. I mean, I think it's absolutely true that if you're going to be the skeptic who's called into TV to challenge a claim, then you have to have done the years and years of reading, because you're there, you're very visible, you could really put your foot in it. But I think we certainly shouldn't scare people off to say, don't go out there and do anything. And Simon, you mentioned the malaria stuff. I actually went into Holland and Barrett's about 6 months ago and said, I'm going to West Africa, same story. Holland and Barrett's will give you sugar pills for malaria. They'll give you sugar pills for a headache that you tell them you've had, a migraine you tell them you've had for 6 days of the last 7, and it's made you ill, you've been vomiting for the last week. They'll give you sugar pills, homeopathic pills, for that headache. Now, I didn't have, obviously I've done some research and work in that kind of area, but it didn't stop any one of you going into a Holland and Barrett's. You don't need to have done 10 years of reading books to know that sugar pills are nonsense, to know that Holland and Barrett's or Boots sell this kind of stuff, and to go out there and actually do something for yourself. And I think perhaps that's something from my skill set, or something the way I like to see skepticism is, I think people should be getting quite involved and out there challenging things. Go and see a spiritualist, go to a spiritualist church. It costs £3 to get into. Well, it's nothing.
That's cutting your teeth.
Yeah.
That's the microphone.
Sorry.
I just say that's cutting. I agree with what you're saying, of course, but the cutting your teeth, learning what's what is visiting these people. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, and I think that's what I want people to take from this panel. I hope we can get to is that I kind of worry sometimes that that some people might see a form of skepticism as being the pseudoscience is out there, but it's behind this like perspex barrier. We can look, but we don't touch. We don't get involved. We don't get our hands dirty. It's enough to just talk about it. But it's so much more interesting and so much more vital, I think, in terms of form of activism, to also have people who are out there visiting the psychics and seeing what they're saying, going along to the homeopaths and seeing what kind of information they would give to someone who didn't know the stuff that you know, that this stuff is nonsense. You know, you have the education here that homeopathy doesn't work. There's other people out there who don't, and those are the ones who get really conned and hurt by this kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of the thing that I like to look at skeptical activism as, is doing that kind of thing. And the other side of it, I think, is, and it's a horrendous name drop that I once had dinner with Joe Nichol. And I'm going to horrendously name drop that often because he's absolutely wonderful. But he said to me something at the time that I think was quite stuck with me, and I think it's a great piece of advice. He told me that, you know, one day you'll be an old man like I am. Like he is, I'm not. He said, one day you'll be an old man like I am, and you want to look back over your life and say, I caused a lot of mischief. And I think that's an area of skepticism that we need to do a little bit more of, is causing mischief for the people out there who do deserve it. And we find the targets of people who genuinely do need a little mischief causing, and yeah, we have a little fun. So I think that's the kind of skeptical activism I like to be part of. And the 1023 campaign, funnily enough. Hey! Yeah, anyway.
Thanks very much, Marsh. Can I ask the panel to have whoever wants to comment can comment, but what are the pitfalls of becoming activist? You know, what are the mistakes that can be avoided? You know, warning signs. What should we watch out for?
Pitfalls. I think getting frustrated too quickly is a pitfall, and expect it. Expect not to bust the cracks. It happens. I guess I keep harping back to this. Do your time. Cut your teeth. Visit psychics by all means. In Australia, in Sydney, every year, twice a year, there is the Mind Body Spirit Festival. We call Mind Body Wallet, of course, and it's full of alternative med people and psychics and all sorts of things. And I go every 6 months because I can't afford to lose my touch in these matters. And that, to me, I regard that as being part of an active skeptic. You know, I know a lot of skeptics who think that's silly, and they don't need to go to that sort of thing, but I think it's pretty important.
I think it's not just important, it's also fascinating, it's also genuinely interesting. I think having the chance to speak to someone you completely disagree with, I think you should embrace that every opportunity you can, because I could have a conversation with any one of you in this room and you're going to agree with me. I mean, well, maybe, perhaps, but broadly speaking, we'd be on the same kind of points of view. But I think you learn an awful lot more by talking to people that you completely, comprehensively disagree with. And that can, as Richard said, you can get quite frustrated quite quickly.
And I think a really big benefit of that is that they no longer, they change their view about us a bit.
Absolutely.
Because Oliver, the Shepton Mallet homeopathic farmer.
Dowling.
Oh yes, Dowling.
Oliver Dowling. I was giving a talk in the West Country and he couldn't get in. And he tweeted me, and I made an effort to make sure he could come in and attend. And then he was still kind of, you know, who's paying me, you know, who are the big agricultural businesses that are funding us, etc. And so I just said, look, just tweet me a phone number, I'll give you a ring, we'll have a chat. You know, we profoundly disagree, but I kind of think we're both fairly decent people, and this is why we do what we do.
You think that often they won't see that. They won't see that skeptics, they're the people out there who are writing nasty stuff.
Yeah, and similarly yesterday, Michelle Shine, a homeopath in London, said, because I was tweeting about this Lindsay Kent libel case, and she was saying, yeah, you only want free speech for skeptics and so on. I said, well, hang on. Leslie Kemp is a grandmother who's a transcriber. You know, the law will mean that if you slag me off, it's going to be harder for me to defend myself. It's a law about getting the fairness right in the balance. It's not about... So, you know, I think, just tweet me your number, we'll have a chat. And that can really be diffusing in terms of them saying, well, okay, you know, often they don't reply, but at least they know you're open to discussion. And then, as well as building bridges, it's also about building understanding of what their position is and what they're trying to do.
I think that's absolutely key, because I know Richard was saying that you can get frustrated, and that's the biggest pitfall you can fall into, is be in a conversation with someone you totally disagree with and lose your rag, or think that that you have to convince them. And I think the way I always tend to think about those conversations is that you have to reframe what qualifies as a success. So you go into that conversation, you're never going, oh, it's very rare that you're going to have that person come away totally agree with you. You've changed their mind, you've changed their worldview. There aren't many Mark Linuses out there who will change everything about their entire worldview on something based on evidence and conversations. But if you consider success to be, you come out of that conversation, they think you were, okay, I disagree, but they were a nice person, I can understand where he was from. You understand an awful lot more about that person, their views, their influences, what led them to believe the stuff they believe, and you suddenly understand an awful lot more about why people believe in psychics, or why people believe in ghosts, or why people go to homeopaths, and that allows you to take away much more information to then start countering those effects. You can see what a homeopath says to somebody who knows nothing about it, and you know how to then dissuade those arguments, how to take apart those arguments. But if you go in there all guns blazing, you're just going to have the same old fact that.
And Richard talked about getting frustrated, I think, and not letting that put you off. I mean, turn that frustration into further activism. Let that galvanise you. So, for example, what Marsh just said about not Calvin and Hobbes. Holland and Barrett. Calvin and Hobbes are nice people. So Nightingale looked at Holland and Barrett, and I think the logic was they're all over the country. They're massive purveyors of woo. And a lot of that woo is hard to tackle because it's just supplements. It's not being promoted for a particular treatment. But they do sell homeopathy, and they did have a little advertising hoarding, tiny little brochure of what you could use homeopathy for in front of every single pill cabinet of homeopathy. So Alan complained about this to, I think, Holland and Barrett, or MHRA, the Medical Healthcare Regulatory Agency, and Holland and Barrett acted. They sent out a letter to get all these things withdrawn. I went into my local Holland and Barrett, it was still there. Frustrating. So the MHRA are acting, Holland and Barrett are acting, but nothing changes. So you complain again. Nothing changes. You complain again. And I think Alan was saying that a skeptic yesterday was in the local one around the corner. That little advertising hoarding is still there. Now, it's really frustrating. But one, I think Nightingale and skeptics are having an impact because the number is reducing drastically, and having metrics and measurement can be useful to know how much of an impact you are having. And then immediately the bell that goes off in my head is, okay, undercover recordings of Holland and Barrett salesmen promoting homeopathy for malaria.
I can play it to you later on if you like.
It's not a. So maybe in this situation the MHRA is one angle. Maybe a little media story based on recording, because that's a horrendous thing for a respected company to be doing. So it's about thinking around the problem, brainstorming, and all of these things seem to work in groups. So it's Alan and Maria and Simon. It's me and Sense About Science. It's you and Dr. Rachel. It's groups that somehow can support each other and develop ideas.
Can I just... One of the things that's always frustrated me when I come to a conference or what have you, and there's people at the front of the stage and they're talking about all these great things that they're doing, and it really does sound fantastic. But at the same time, I sort of get something in the back of my mind that says, yeah, well, you can do that, but can I do that? I mean, it takes some bravery to go into Holland and Barrett wielding a secret microphone. Would you agree with me? But it takes a little bit of something, doesn't it?
But it doesn't
so
take.
Can you just talk about breaking that barrier?
No, but it doesn't. But then, if that's not your thing, like I can't do what Hayley Steve. I don't know if Hayley's here.
She's there.
Oh God!
You can't see her. She's a ghost. Thank you very much. Here all week.
I won't say what I was going to say.
You're here all week, aren't you?
No, what I was saying, I mean, you actually petition people, or not petition them, but you give them information as they go into psychic shows, and you'll talk to them in a very respectful, but
the Barnum Project.
Yeah, and that's not what I could do, because I find it hard to kind of just talk to people like that. It's difficult for me. So that's not my thing. Similarly, going into Holland Barrett with recording equipment may not be their thing, but. I mean, one of the things that Alan's absolutely fantastic at is understanding regulation. I can't do that. So you need to look at what your skill set is and work to that.
Yeah, and there's something about going to Holland Barrett, yes, with a recording device. That might be too far down the line, but you can go into Holland Barrett. I mean, that's just a shop. That's not a big thing. You can go and see what's on the shelf. You can ask about it. That doesn't take that much bravery. And if you then think this is something to be looked at, there are people out there who can do that. But it's good to have more people trying to get involved, and maybe after a while of having those kind of conversations, you start to feel a bit more involved, and you start to feel like I can do something a little bit more innovative.
Is it legal in this country to secretly record someone?
As long as you don't tell anyone, possibly. No,
You can't use it in a court of law. It's much harder to use it in a court of law, but you certainly can use it in investigative journalism. I know the rules in Australia are very different. No. Here, there's a public interest defence that you can use that for. Phone hacking is a bad idea. This is okay. But again, there was a story this week. It's only been here from Bristol Skeptics. Okay, there's a chap called Tom Kendrick, I think, in Bristol Skeptics, whose mother died of cancer and who followed an alternative route. And for him, it was incredibly courageous. He was interviewed on BBC Radio Bristol on Friday morning because he was going to go to a cancer quack conference and hand out leaflets telling the story of him and his mother and why conventional people should listen to their doctors and listen to their GPs, not follow the advice. So everybody will have a different angle and a different approach as to how... And last time I spoke to a pharmacist, was a small independent pharmacist, and I just said, you don't have much homeopathy. And he said, oh, you know, there's not much call for it nowadays, it's declining, once we've solved this, we probably won't do it. But then we also had a long discussion about, well, why did you stop it? You know, you're a pharmacist, you're trained. And to turn into a long kind of 50, he was interested, he was willing to talk, I found it interesting, he found it interesting. Maybe at the end of it, he will definitely make sure he won't reorder it. I don't know, but it's a long road, and every engagement makes a little bit of difference, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very similar experience in Boots, speaking to the Boots pharmacist who was giving me a flu jab, and I happened to drop in that we were part of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, and he said, that name rings a bell. And I had to then explain everything that we did. The really interesting thing about that was, he said, oh, I've always known homeopathy's nonsense, but I never really saw it as that big of an issue, so when people ask for it, if they directly ask for it, I'll still give it to them. But after we were talking, he said, I'll probably reconsider in the future, maybe I won't do that. And he also said, you should see the magnets that we sell, that you put in your underwear, to your menopause. The other stuff that we sell is just as bullshit, it's brilliant. So he got very interested in it all.
And it's weird where these things can lead. So Halloween 18 months ago, we offered to test Psychic Sally in Liverpool at the Adelphi. And she didn't turn up, and there were some pluses that came out of that. There was a bit of media attention, we learned a few things that came out of it. Somebody slipped a very interesting note under the door of where I was staying, which may have very interesting repercussions later down the line, which hopefully I'll talk about later this year. But you never know quite what will emerge out of these.
What did it say?
I can't tell you. I wish I could tell you.
Actually,
whisper it in our ears.
On the subject of never know what might happen, I went to a spiritualist church in Liverpool because I thought I've got nothing to do in the evening. You know, it's either there's nothing on telly, there's no football games on. It's £3 to get a show where someone pretends to talk to the dead. Why would you not pay £3 for someone to pretend to talk? It's a bargain. And there was this remarkable spiritualist up on stage, and she was probably, I would say, knocking on to being relatively elderly. She had a quite grandmotherly kind of persona about her. She had that thing that lots of old ladies have, where they have tissues stuffed up every possible avenue of their clothing. And there was a point in her reading, she was doing very, very well to a couple in the middle of the room, and very, very accurate. And then she started to slip on the accuracy. And it must have been because she had a cold or something like that, because she got a handkerchief out, and she opened it up. And then she put it away again, having looked at the inside of the handkerchief, and she was very accurate immediately after that. And I thought, I've just witnessed a hot reading right there. I mean, there's nothing I can do necessarily, but I've seen this happen. I can tell how this happens. And the very interesting thing about that is, that was the evening that I happened to look across the line in the spiritualist church, and sat against the wall taking notes was a psychic I've met in the past, whose name I won't use because we're recording this. But we had a psychic in the room watching a spiritualist on stage doing readings to the type of people who go to a spiritualist church and taking notes, because he had a show in Liverpool a fortnight later, and the kind of people who go to a spiritualist church may well be the kind of people who go to see a psychic. So because you've just gone along, you took a punt on a spiritualist church, you've now got potentially a decent story. And we sent someone along to a show, and unfortunately none of the notes that he'd made come up and none of the readings correlated. But if you have a recording of that spiritualist church, just because you happen to go, and you see somebody there, and then you go along to his gig and you record that too, and the readings correlate, that's a pop-off moment, basically. You can actually directly prove this reading came from here, and here's the photos, here's the recording, and it's just because you took a punt on a £3 spiritualist church.
Yes, okay. I want to make another point about being an active skeptic in sort of similar situations. Sometimes it's really hard to have the bottle to do it. Did anybody see my talk just now in the other room? Yeah. When I went to test the Australian distributor, Tom O'Dowd, for the power balance stuff, if you probably don't recall hearing, but my voice was like that. And that was because I was nervous. and I was shaking a little bit. Not only was I on camera, my reputation was on the line, and I was more or less confronting a man. I tried to do it nicely. And also when I saw a psychic make light of terrorist tragedies, I sometimes wonder whether I didn't stand up to shout something because I lost my nerve. I'm not sure now. But yeah, sometimes it just takes no small amount of bottle to do these things.
But being in a position gets you used to having that kind of bottle too.
Yeah, but sometimes even now, if I'm in the situation where I have to do an investigation or confront somebody, it's not easy. You know, I don't walk in there like it's all happening and I'm in control of the situation. Last year at the amazing meeting, I was part of a test to test somebody else with these power things, live on stage with James Randi in the audience and all the rest of it. And I worked with Banachek and Jamie and Swiss to make this all happen. And before the test on stage, I can tell you there were 5 or 6 very nervous skeptics. You know, we came out all confident and everything, but that was a bit of a front. So yeah, you need a bit of bottle to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind admitting in the Spiritualist Church, when I saw the psychic along the edge of the line, I did sort of hide down in my seat slightly and pull my coat up, and then as soon as it was over, I got the hell out of Dodge before he caught me.
I've been to 4 Psychic Sally shows in the last year, and the problem with going to a Psychic Sally show, is that the audience is predominantly female. And it's predominantly wide, and it predominantly doesn't have spiky hair. But I always get the very, very final row on the very, very upper end. But because it's a learning experience. I want to go there, I want to see what she's doing, I want to see what's being repeated, I want to see what may or may not be happening. And then I went to see her do a Q&A in a church about a month ago. And I put my hand up and asked a question. I was really nervous. My voice was trembling because I'm surrounded by people who are very sympathetic to Sally. I'm going to actually ask her a question. And I tried to be as polite as possible and said, you know, you talked about scientists, you talked about engaging with scientists, you said you could demonstrate your powers. That would be wonderful. It would be wonderful for our understanding of your abilities. It would be wonderful for progressing science. I know that Chris French has asked to test you on more than one occasion. Given what you've said and how beneficial it would be to the spiritualist community and the scientific community, would you agree to doing that? And she lost it. She flipped. Wow. She actually said, I'll give him a reading, which is he'll never get to meet me. That's how I read. She just was strolling back across the stage. But then afterwards, the 2 assistants came up to me and said, would you like to go and meet Sally? So I actually got to meet her, got to shake hands, got to chat with her. She's very, very friendly. I got to wait in the queue with people, with other people waiting to meet her, got chatting to them, who were quite hostile to me about the question I'd raised. I know the question I'd raised was perfectly fair and reasonable, but her reaction to it had annoyed them, feeling that I'd elicited that reaction. But by the time we actually reached Sally, they were kind of on my side, and they were saying, well, what would be a fair test? If they don't like Chris French's test, what sort of test could we have? And they actually asked her to take part in a test, which was not to do a reading for me, but to do a reading for a friend of mine that would be fully recorded and uploaded to the internet. Right. And she said she wouldn't do that because she's suing someone for libel, and it would be it's not legally allowed for her to do that. I've emailed her lawyer and said, why is it not allowed? So it's just going out there and doing things is part of building a knowledge-based experience, so that maybe you can then do something later that challenges these beliefs.
It's kind of fun too.
It is fun.
Can I just ask the audience, please, out of all of you in here, who would describe themselves right now as activist? Okay. Who would like to engage in, or either begin or engage in more activism? Right, that's a lot. Brilliant, okay. So, there's a spectrum of things that can be done. For example, would you say that commenting on the internet is activism? So my question is, how big or small should we think when we commence engaging in activism? How do we get started? Anyone?
I think anything counts. It's whatever you're confident of. So, you know, joining a Mumsnet group and commenting on dodgy treatments for colic is really important. So, you know, people need to be doing that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, something I'd like to do sooner or later is, fun is really important. But the most important thing is is impact, making a difference. So that's why I'm worried about Holland and Barrett.
Yeah.
So how do we really deal with colic? Maybe, or how do we deal with these dodgy claims about colic? Maybe we need to go to the head of Mumsnet and maybe get them to issue some kind of statement. I don't think that would probably happen. Who has the biggest influence on mums? Well, middle-class mums, it's the National Childbirth Trust. Maybe we need to engage with them and see what they say, etc. So you begin to think around the problem, but starting with comments on Mumsnet to talking to the director of National Childbirth Trust, and anything in between goes.
Okay. What about gathering resources, Richard? How do we get the resource? How do we organise ourselves? Is it lone action, or should we get a few fellow skeptics together, or should we act as an entire skeptic in the pub, or the entire nation? You know, how should we organise? How do we organise ourselves? How do we get started on that?
I guess, like any other venture in life where you're dealing with a lot of people, you try to seek out good people. We have a philosophy in the Australian Skeptics in Sydney. There's a central committee of 12, 13, 14 people. It varies. But you need to be invited onto that inner sanctum, the cardinal, what is it, the conclave of cardinals, or whatever you call it. And there's very good reasons for that. It's not because if someone is lovely and keen and wants to be involved, we say go away, not far from it. But to be involved in the very core aspects of it, we need people with very strong skill sets. We have a couple of legal people. We have a good engineer with a long history of skepticism, Dr. Raichi, of course, with her specialised knowledge, and that really helps. But at the same time, we'll have a skeptics in the pub, and one of the greatest examples of everyday skeptics, everyday people really being active and making a big difference is with the Facebook group SAVN, Stop the AVN.
Yeah.
Now, they not necessarily come to skeptics in the pub, they don't come, that's fine, but they're online and they're active and they're researching things, or they're commenting on blogs, and that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think the way that we tend to look at things in the Merseyside Skeptic Society, I think technically we kind of see our skeptics in the pub like Fight Club, and our activism like Project Mayhem. Is that the skeptics in the pub is there to get people in, and to get people to know each other, to see what skills that people have got, and then you see what skills you got and say, right, I think you're probably the perfect person to be handling complaints. So I mean, we did the Shoesy video. We took the Shoesy wristbands, which are these nonsense products, very similar to Power Balance. And we bought 2 of those, and we put together a double-blind test, and we had it published in The Guardian. It was published in the Daily Mail as well, which I maintain is the best place to publish something that is genuinely true, because it's kicking something that's genuinely bollocks off the pages. But the great thing about what I really liked about putting that Shoesy thing together is, yes, it was me and it was Mike, and we've worked on things in the past, but it was also Mark Pentler, who started coming along to Skeptics in the Pub because he filmed stuff and he wanted to film our talks, and he wanted to be around for the next time he wanted to do something. We needed a camera. He was the guy. We had Rich Cooper, who's our photographer. He loves taking photographs. He takes photos of our Skeptics in the Pub. This project came up. He was the photographer on that. We had what we didn't really make a big deal of, one of our other members, Warren Niblock. While we were doing the video, because I can stand in front of people and be hopefully able to be listened to, and people will understand what I'm saying. I'm not too bad. Unlike this sentence is putting it across, I'm not too bad a communicator, is what I was trying to say. And that fucking arduous sentence I was trying to get out. I can be alright.
That's all we've got time for, folks.
Michael's our organiser, but at the same time we did the video, we put that out. At the same time as we did that, we had Warren making an ASA complaint on Shoesy UK's website. And I actually think, unfortunately, that complaint was so successful that they took down all of the claims that they made. They took it down so quickly that by the time we got the video up, the claims were no longer there, and the lawyers had a heart attack because his complaint was so successful. So while we were tackling it through the media and tackling it through a video and that kind of slightly showy activism, we had another of our members who's very diligent, very much down the line, can understand and put through and word complaints very well. He put the complaint through, and Shoesy UK no longer operate in the UK. The company shut down. They are no longer a trading company in this country.
I must say that was a wonderful example of Anglo-Australian cooperation, because at the same time, or just before, or just roughly the same time, we didn't make a video, but we were attacking Shoesy in Australia full blast, and had them to almost come to the TV station to do a test. The guy in Australia who was from New Zealand rang up the skeptics and abused us, and we recorded that. And then I was working very closely with the Merseyside skeptics when all that Shoesy stuff came on, and Shoesy left Australia too. So yeah.
Okay. So we are very nice, very nice. Hands across the ocean there. So we're a bunch of skeptics in the pub groups, mostly, I think, people who attend Skeptics in the Pub. So the way that we're organised in the UK is locally, isn't it? You know, we're in small groups, we're not a national organisation or anything like that. Can the panel suggest any, like a bullet point list of things we could be doing locally on an ongoing basis? You know, taking care of business on our own territory. What kind of things could we be thinking about in that regard? Could we tidy up our own doorstep?
I think just keeping an eye out for any dodgy claims, whether it's local newspapers, whether it's local advertising, whether it's... And the ASA is brilliant. The ASA will not tolerate false claims. Their powers of enforcement are limited, but often just a letter from the ASA is enough for somebody to take down their advertising or change their website. So looking at those false claims locally is really important. Emailing your local media. If your local radio station's interviewing a quack or is promoting something that's inappropriate, then email them, get a response from them. If they're not willing to engage with you, write to Ofcom, write to BBC complaint procedures. So there are so many things out there that I mean, that's why we're all here. There's so much crap out there that needs to be tackled.
Sorry, Richard. Marsh, Simon's just suggesting that, you know, we get in touch with the local media and so on. Can you talk, you know, in the limited time we have got left, we've got a couple more points to cover. Can you talk a little bit about engaging with local media? How do you deal with the media? Are they reasonable people? Are they difficult to deal with? You know, just we all want to be effective in the media, but again, it's one of those things that can sometimes seem a little bit out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, it very much depends, I guess, on the publication or the radio station, but I think it's always worth trying to get to know, especially if you're a Skeptics in the Pub group, get to know your local radio station, your local paper, call up, just try and chat to the features editor or someone in the science kind of area, because... And it's something I talk an awful lot about in other places. The media, as everything's moving online and there's just not any money in the media anymore, people are desperate for something to fill their pages. And this is probably why I genuinely think we see a lot of bullshit in the press, in part. It's not ideological, it's just because that's the easiest stuff to print. It's put in front of them, people are writing it the right way, they're writing a press release, they're giving photos, they're giving quotes from authorities, I mean, we always talk about the argument from authority and how that's a terrible thing, and it's absolutely true. And we criticise the media for only wanting voices of authority. So they only talk to that person because they've got a PhD, they've got a doctor in front of their name. It turns out we've got a lot of authorities as well. I mean, so long as our argument isn't he's right because he's a doctor, but as long as our argument is everything he's saying he's right, and the media will listen to him because he's a doctor, I think that's perfectly valid. So I think having the right kind of spokesman or understanding what the media are looking for, understanding that they're looking to fill their pages, the radio stations and the breakfast in the mornings are looking for something to talk about with a local interest, a local angle, and just trying to get to know the people at your local media outlets, I think could be really, really valuable. I know, Simon, this is something you were looking to do too.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one thing that skeptics in the pub groups could do is maybe if you have a speaker who may have some broader interest, and the speakers that you have generally are fundamentally interesting, to try and get them on the local media, so that the one they're talking to your group, which is great, but then they're also talking to the 10,000 people that don't attend your event. And that can be hard work, and it can be miserable, and it can be, there's a lot of cold calling, and maybe sometimes the media isn't that interested. But once you make one contact, once you've met the breakfast show producer, and once they know that you've got David Aronovich, or you've got Marsh coming on to talk about this or that, or Haley talking about ghosts, then you've made a friend for life kind of thing. And every month you can give them a call and say, look, we've got such and such, do you want them on board? So the media is a great tool. And maybe split it so the person that's trying to build media contacts is not the person who's also complaining about your local media as well. Probably good to keep those two roles separate.
Thanks, Simon. Richard, what's your view? What are the bullet point things that you should be taking care of locally in your own area, maybe, and also about talking to the media, please?
Oh, talking to the media. Yeah. Well, first of all, what Simon said, and I'll illustrate this, is very important. Where he said, "Keep your eyes open." That's really important. From my personal experience, I was in a local fair in Sydney, wandering around, having a look. It was great fun, food and all the rest of it. And there was a tent for a local chiropractor. Oh, well, okay, there you go. But he was advertising an upcoming talk they were giving about vaccination. His name was Nimrod Wiener.
Obviously.
Of course he
that
was. Of course he was.
And what I did was, good old iPhone, take a picture of it, send it to Dr. H.E., and the rest is history, because she got on their ass, I can tell you now. That was really important. Just, I happened to see a sign. Okay, there it is. Take the photograph. Let's progress it. And the second part, the media.
Yeah. Just very briefly, please.
Very briefly, yeah. It's nice to have good contacts with the media. Don't expect them to always be on your side. They don't. All you can do is be friendly. Always be friendly and helpful to them, even if they...
And responsive.
Quickly responsive, yeah. Don't be a dick, as they say.
Yeah, but the only other thing is just whether... I think what was brilliant about the Friday piece on Radio Bristol with Tom Kendrick was that he said, I've got a problem with alternative therapists. They led to the early death of my mother, and I want the world to know about this. And that put the alternative therapists on the back foot. And the alternative therapist they had in the programme was very, very defensive and kind of supported what he said, because she couldn't really go against it.
And it's anecdote-led, I guess, as well. I mean, the media loves anecdotes.
Yeah.
And if our anecdotes are based on reality and supported
you
by
have
real
arguments
theory,
and evidence, and then you use an anecdote to back that up. Now, the problem I have is that when they get when it's National Homeopathy Awareness Month, we've got a homeopath in the studio, and we've got a skeptic here to debate. I think we always lose those, because it's impossible to win. There's somebody phones in and they said, I've got terrible arthritis, homeopathy treats it, I swear by it, my whole family.
That's all we need to
do. So do we engage? Personal story. Do we engage with those, or I come to the position where I'm almost thinking I just don't want to do it, and instead I want to talk to you as a producer for 15 minutes about why you are putting this on and the harm that you are causing. And I'm not quite sure where I stand on that at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's still always worth. Well, if you can get away with it, it's worth speaking to them, because otherwise they're speaking without anybody saying, "Well, actually, this isn't true," and then someone's going to hear that and not go.
It's a tightrope. It really is. Sometimes you don't make the right call on those. Yeah.
Okay. So we're drawing to the end now. In a moment, I'll ask each of the panellists to make a final comment in a desperate attempt to inspire those of you who wish to start being activists, or those of you who wish to improve your activism. So we're testing lots of things in one go there. So that'll be in a moment. While I just point out that my highlight of this talk was the look of disappointment on Chris Coltrane's face when he found out that phone hacking was a bad thing. Could you start me off, Simon? Can we inspire anybody? Just very briefly.
Okay, so 3, 4, 4.5, 5 years ago, James Randi came to London on a one-day event called Randy Stock. I think it was in Conway Hall, and I think it was the first time that lots of skeptics got together in one room, and we met each other almost for the first time, and the result of that was enormous. And James Randi got up on stage, and I remember he said, skepticism never really makes a difference, but you'll have a lot of fun doing it. And
so you had to finish that sentence. That was not inspiring at all.
But I followed him. I spoke after. I can't remember what I was speaking at. But I disagreed, because there are now fewer homeopathic hospitals in the UK than there used to be. And one letter from a group of academics and doctors asking NHS Trust to justify their funding of homeopathy has had a real impact on NHS spending on homeopathy. And we've done that because James Randi's inspired us. So I really wanted him to know that we can make a difference, and we often make a difference because of the things he's done in the past. So it is fun, but it really also can make a difference.
Thanks very much.
It can make a difference. It really can. I wonder where he was coming from. I know Randy very well, and I suspect he had a slightly different point. Be that as it may. Oh, by crikey, it makes a difference. I mean, those of you who saw Dr. Rachel's talks, we've got those bastards on the run. We are screwing them down, and they can go to hell. We're doing that. And it's hard, and it's long, and it's frustrating, but by crikey, we're making a difference, and I find that inspiring.
I guess I want to take this a slightly different way, because could the people put their hands back up who wanted to get involved in activism? can you look around and look at each other and talk to each other? Because if let's say there's 100 or so people in this room, it might be a little bit more than that. Let's say 60 of you had your hands up there. If there were groups of 15, that's 4 different groups. If you had one idea for the 4 of you, you could have 4 great ideas for something to go forward with right now. If you just sit down and have a chat, and it only takes an idea that can be fun and silly. We saw Chris last night in his comedy was talking about some of the fun and silly ideas they've done with UK Uncut, and the fact that gets an awful lot of attention and has genuine questions asked by people because it's a bit of a silly idea. So activism can be the letter writing, which is absolutely vital, and the complaining, which is absolutely vital, but the fun and silly ideas are also there to be done, and those ones that really can also be very enjoyable to do. And with enough people here, enough people in a room talking about the same thing, ideas get generated, and I think that's all we need to do is start having more of those conversations and something can get done.
We haven't really got time for questions, but go on very quickly.
I run a national campaign for 20-mile-an-hour limits because 30 is a nonsense where people live. So if you're interested in campaigning on that against Safe Speed, who are a dangerous organisation who think 30 is safer than 20, please come and see me.
Cool. Thank you, Anna. Okay, I'd like to first of all specifically thank Simon for setting up the Good Thinking Society. I think it's a great idea. I think it's going to continue developing, I'm sure of that, and it's just another example of how effective we are becoming as
we need more of your hands in his pockets, is what we want. Yes. More of your hands in his pockets.
But otherwise, I'd like to I'd like to thank Simon, Richard and Marsh, your panel, ladies and gentlemen.